Firstly, congratulations. You have made it past the first stage of the PASCH design competition. Your sketches were creative, fun, and simply stunning. You are through to the production phase, and now you stand a chance to become one of our finalists. This is what's going to happen next. Step 1. You will collect or receive the prescribed PASCH design fabric from your respective teacher. This is what you will use to make your garment or your fashion item. Step 2. You will make your garment according to your sketch submitted. Step 3. You will have to submit your garment with information in a 30-second video in German. We will need your name, your grade, your school, your style choice, and the inspiration for your garment. Here are the judges to give you tips on how to put your piece together. They will also share some valuable advice that will help you deal with the challenges that you might encounter.
Hi guys, Lafika Joyce here, and congratulations on making it through to the next round of this design project. So, this is what we call Sewing Terminology 101 with me. So, the first thing that I want to tell you guys about is right side versus wrong side of fabric. So, you have your PASCH fabric, correct? I know it'll look tricky, but the more livelier side of the fabric, that's what we call your right side. And then if you turn it inside, that's your wrong side. So when you cut, you always cut your fabric right on right so that your garment can come out like this. So even here you can see, wrong side is duller, it's darker. Right side is more livelier. Word number 2 is your selvage. So your selvage is the finished line of the product, of the fabric, which is usually located at the edge of the line. So on most fabrics, it's either written like this, as you can see it says PASCH Goethe Institute. That is what we call your selvage. Most of the time we don't actually use that when you're sewing because it's quite stiff, and you also don't want like the writing to be in your design unless that is what you purposefully intend on doing, that you want the writing of the selvages to be part of your design. Number 3, grain line. So your grain line is your parallel line that runs on your pattern block. So it's just like, for example, let's say if you're cutting stripes, you'd want everything to run parallel against the selvage. So you'd usually place it down, and you pin it down, and you usually measure the distance from the grain line, which is this, to the end of your fabric. So I'll show you guys this when I cut the fabric on just like how the grain line actually works. Okay, so step number 4. So we spoke about the grain line, but now you're probably wondering, like, what if I want something with more stretch in it? That's where the bias comes in, true bias. So true bias, you usually cut it at a 45-degree angle. So just show you. Okay, so let's say, so this is usually how straight it is, right? 45-degree angle is if you cut it along this line, right? So that's your true bias. So we'll take, let's say, your pattern, and because you fold it on a 45-degree angle, it would lie like this, and that's just to give your fabric with some slight stretch. So that's your true bias. Number 5, finishes. So there are different types of finishes, but more specifically a hem. So the hem is what is at the bottom of your finished garment, the folded part. So it's usually folded neatly, just so that you've got like a clean finishing. You've got different types of hemming. You've got like a thin one where you have to like roll it twice, like 1.5, 1.5, and that gives you this. And then you also get this type of hemming where it's finished nicely so that you don't have the raw edges fraying. And fraying is basically this. When I say fraying is when the fabric comes off, and you wouldn't want that in your finished product. Hence why you need to hem it so that it looks neater. Number 6, overlocking. What is overlocking? Overlocking is basically the cleaning up of your garment inside. So it looks like this. So if you don't have an overlocker machine, that's pretty cool, that's fine, it's no stress. Then you can use the zigzag option on your sewing machine. So if you don't have an overlocker, you can just zigzag, and then it finishes off and cleans off your edges on your seams, on your hems. So yeah, that's what overlocking is. Number 7, seam allowance. So seam allowance is actually the distance between your stitch line and the raw edge. And Sadako will show you that when he puts in the zip of what a stitch line is. But usually your stitch line should either be 1 centimeter or 1.5 centimeters. Step number 8. So the seam is basically where the two lines of the two pieces of fabric meet. So wherever the pieces meet, there should be a seam. For example, here's the front of the shirt. You have a seam that connects to the back. So everywhere should be a seam. Like here, there's a seam from the shoulder line that connects all the way down to the side seam. That's what a seam is. It's basically just the two pieces of fabric connected together. Number 9, binding. This also comes back to finishes. So if you're worried about how your stuff looks in terms of finishes, you don't maybe have facing to make it like a clean finish, this is what binding looks like. So it's a thin, stretchy piece of fabric that you usually get on a roll, but if you want to be really creative, you can actually make your own bias binding. And that, you see, this just gives the neckline a clean finish. Finishes are very important. Number 10 is a bobbin, this little pretty thing. This actually goes with your sewing machine. So what you usually do is you thread it on the sewing machine, and this is what the sewing machine uses when you sew. It picks up the threads to stitch. Dots. Dots are very important, especially in helping accentuate the figure. So you'd usually find a dot by the waist, or in ladies' cases, on the bust dot. So you get waist dots and bust dots. So those are just basically to help accentuate the figure. So usually in most garments, especially if you have like a skirt or a dress, you'd find lining. So lining is basically the inside of the extra fabric inside a garment, which is just basically to also cover up the finishing, but also in terms of getting in and moving, it's so much easier when there's lining in a garment. Gathers. Step number 13 is gathers. So gathers is basically how you gather a fabric to create ruffles. Usually gathers are sewn onto elastic, or if you want to make a longer fabric shorter, then you can sometimes gather it. So ideally, usually, for example, on this leg, it would be a straight leg. But because we put in an elastic and it's gathered, it's scrunched it up to make it smaller. Pleats. So pleats are a type of fold that happens in a fabric when you want to create more volume. For example, this skirt. This skirt is pleated, so I've folded it several times. So it's just basically when you take a fabric and you do that. That's pleating, and then you sew it down. Basically to create some form of draping or fall on a garment. Number 15, buttonholes. So if you're creating a garment that requires buttons, you can either have sew-on buttons like these little babies over here, or you can have press studs. So when it comes to press studs, you don't actually need buttonholes, but if you are having buttons that you actually have to sew on by hand, you'd need to create a buttonhole like this. Patchwork. So the really cool thing about patchwork is that you can kind of recreate your own fabric, if that makes sense. So I've done patchwork for you here. So basically it's just the contrast of different fabrics and just mixing and matching them. So I've sewn these using the patch design project and then a contrast fabric. Remember in my previous video, I spoke about contrast fabrics with printed fabrics. So this is how you can contrast them with a solid and with a print. And this is how a final patchwork has been done. So you see it's different shapes to create one using different types of fabrics. And don't forget to press your patchwork. So pressing means ironing it. So you need to iron it flat so that it lies nice and clean like this. See, this is also a lining. So everything basically always needs to be lined. And you see how beautiful and straight that is because it's been pressed and ironed nicely. Okay, so we are aware that you guys are students and obviously most of you don't know how to make a pattern. Don't worry. Remember in my past video, I said technology is your friend, YouTube it. But you can find free patterns online, which would make your life so much easier. You just print them out in the size that you want, and then you can do like tiny adjustments on like how you want your garment to be. So the website will definitely be down below. We'll put it there. But there's so many other websites where you can get free sewing patterns. So just go into Google, your best friend, and type in free sewing patterns. It's as easy as that. And yeah, good luck making your garments. Okay, cool. So this is how we're cutting on the fabric. Make sure that you've pinned your fabric. So the reason why this pattern block has so much tape is because pattern blocks are generally very sensitive and they tear easily. So you'd always have to secure them with like tape. Okay, so this is the back of a dress. If you're cutting something on fold, which means you'd have to fold the fabric so that it becomes one piece, right? But let's say this dress is getting a zip, you wouldn't cut it on fold, okay? And this is your dot. So when you sew it, this is just to indicate where your dot is. But since this is stretch fabric, voila! See, so this is the back of your dress. From pattern to cutting to final product.
Welcome back, guys, and congratulations for making it this far. So what I'm going to show you today, what I'm going to teach you today is how to take measurements. Measurements are very, very, very important, guys. Measurements are the reasons why garments sit properly on an individual. So today we're having the lovely Miss Frida as our model. So I'm going to be using her as basically like a template as to where I'm going to be taking the measurements. So first measurement we're going to take is the waistline. The waistline is right here, which is basically where your navel is. So we take it right there on your navel, all the way around, and we take the measurement for her. It's about 73 centimeters basically. So, and then the next measurement we're going to do is at the bust area. So we're going to do it a full, this is called a full bust measurement. This goes all the way around. And for Frida here is 86 centimeters, which means that she's like a medium, basically. So yeah, but for dresses like this, we have dresses like this, which are open in the center, or even like the swimsuit up there. So you need to take what they call a cup measurement, which is basically from the center here to just below the armpit. That is also important that you need to take that measurement as well. So next measurement we're gonna do the hips, yes, which is basically down here. As Africans, you know, we've got some ladies that are blessed in the hip area. Can you turn for me slightly so the people can actually see where the the measurement is actually taken. So all the way around there, which is very important. Turn around back for me, thank you. So it's about 100 centimeters for that. And the next measurement, depending on what you're making. So if it's a full-on dress, you will need to take from the waist all the way to the floor, depending on whether the gown is that long or how long the gown must be. If it's a shorter dress, or even like a shorter jumpsuit or whatever, you need to take a measurement from the waist to the knees or to the preferred length. Whether it's a short one, it will be down here. If it's a long one, obviously it will be here, where the knees are. And for those of you, I believe some of you are making jumpsuits. So you also need, can I have your leg sort of leg? You need to take the circumference of the thigh. This is also a very important measurement to have. Yes, we need to take that. And then also for pants, if you're doing like a full-on pants like she is wearing right now, still also from the waist all the way down to just where the ankle is. But it also depends on your design, because some pants, they go all the way to the floor. Some of them are a little bit cropped like mine. They end a little bit higher. So you see, it all depends on what exactly that you're trying to create. When it comes to measurements, you must know what exactly you're trying to create. So see, because some of the designs are also doing accessories. Say for instance, you're trying to make a bag. So you must know what the purpose of the bag is. For this one, this is a bag that I also made. This is a laptop bag. So you must take the measurement of an actual laptop, the size of the laptop that you want to create the bag for. And then you take, it's the back and the front and the measurement of the width of the actual bag itself, which is important to take as well. What I need to emphasize on, guys, what is very important is that when it comes to the waistline, it is very different for women than it is for guys. For those of you that are making clothing or garments for guys, the waistline is a little bit lower. It will be basically just below the navel, which is basically around here. This is where guys' pants, or generally any pants really, even like jeans or whatever, they sit down here. Whereas the waistline for women and for garments, or even this jumpsuit you can see right here where the actual waistline is right at the navel itself. So you need to know that for what you're creating. So if it's a woman's jumpsuit or high-waisted pants or whatever, on the navel. If it's a normal one, a little bit just below the navel, almost like 2 fingers below the navel basically. One thing I also forgot to mention, when you are taking your measurements and you're doing like a pattern, what you need to take into consideration is what they call seam allowance. Seam allowance would be, I'll give you an example. I've stitched, I don't know if you can actually see that. I've stitched this line here when I'm stitching 2 pieces of fabric together. The seam allowance is this bit here that remains, that you need to take into consideration, because that's the part, the leeway that you have for when the fabrics are being sewn together. You need to have that little gap, especially when you're putting in zips, which I will show you later on. You need to have that seam allowance, which means that after you take your measurement, say for instance, I was taking her cup measurement, which was like 21. Your seam allowance is usually 1.5 that you add on. So what I would cut or make on the pattern would be 22.5 basically, which would be here. So seam allowance all the way around on any of the surfaces that you're cutting. Whether it's here, this one also has a seam allowance, 1.5. This one, similar here. On the sides, similar here. Unless you're creating where you have to put in, yours doesn't have a zip. If you're inserting a zip, the seam allowance for a zip is 2 centimeters. That because like you need more space to be able to incorporate the zip itself. Oh yes, maybe also, we were talking about the hats. I saw there's a lot of you that are making bucket hats. So what you need to take is what we call the circumference of your hat, which is basically all the way around, where basically the hat is gonna sit. How you all want the fit to be. Some of you might want a smaller one, which is going to be a little bit up here, but most of you are going to want the one that sits securely, which is down here. So that's basically the measurement that you need to take of the head. And then you also need to sort of take the length of the head itself, how higher up you want the head to be. All depends on you, basically. So you have to take this as well. This is also very important. And then also don't forget the seam allowance on that one as well. For some of you, you might be doing what we call draping. Draping is a method of basically you take the material and then you put it around the mannequin, which is homegirl here, and you just shape it according to the design. So draping does not include actually making a pattern. You're making the pattern on the doll itself. So for this one, let me show you. If I want to do something like this, like a shouldered, and then you shape it. But then for draping, it's very important that you guys have your pins, because you can't do any draping without pins. It's essential. So basically what you would do is that you would pin it here on the waistline, like we learned in the previous video, and here where basically the side where it's going to be ending. And maybe you want to do some pleats. Pleats are basically like little folds that you do. So if you want to have a garment that has pleats, you put in the pleats according to what you actually want to make. And then you pin it down. Make sure you pin it down. And then you would do basically the same on the back as well, according to what your design is going to look like. So we're going to do basically the same on the back as well. You do your pleats or whatever you want to do, basically. Pin it. Pinning is very important. Pin it there. And also pin it here. So there, you practically already have half a dress from just draping it and pinning it. And so basically when you will be sewing, you'll just be sewing across here, and then you probably have to sew here as well just to keep the pleats together. And then a lot of this sewing will probably be done by hand. You're going to be hand stitching it, you know, just to have it all together. Yeah, that's the gist of draping, really. Right now I want to show you how to sew or insert a zip. I'm not going to do it on an actual garment. I'm just going to show you on like 2 pieces of cloth, basically. So what I did before, what I did was like a pre-stitch. We talked about the seam allowance before. I stitched right where the seam allowance is, 1.5, which is also shown here if you are fortunate enough to have a machine. It actually is that long line here, basically, on the machine. That's the 1.5. So we just use that line there, basically. And then I just stitched this line here. I basically like to do that first before I insert the zip, because it makes sure that the zip is actually centered if you do like a pre-stitch. And then you pin the zip onto the fabric. If you don't actually have pins, what you can actually do is what we call like a little stitch. You can actually just pre-stitch it on by hand, so we can just stay on, so it's easier for you to work in case you don't have the luxury of having pins with you. Just a moment, just pin that on. And we need to change from your normal, this is a foot, so we need to change from the normal stitching foot to a zip foot. A zip foot is a little bit different. It stitches on the side of Instead of the foot is not full on, it's basically towards the side here. So once the zip foot is on, put it down and start stitching. Sorry. Backstitch. Stitch, back stitch there, and you do exactly the same thing on the other side as well, just attach the zip. I'm actually using a different colored thread so you can actually see how the stitching is done, because initially when you're sewing, you shouldn't be sewing red on white. You should be sewing with actual white thread as well. If you get the white fabric, you must use white thread. If you got the black one, then you must use black thread as well. So the thread is almost sort of invisible when you're sewing it. You don't want the red thread to be shown. This is just for you guys to see what I'm doing exactly. Just continue sewing here. In the beginning, every time you start, when you start sewing something, once you put your foot down and you start sewing, you do what you call a backstitch. Backstitch is what holds either two pieces of fabric together or the zip onto the fabric. It is securing so it doesn't go loose quickly. Because like normal stitches, if you do not backstitch, it will go apart very, very quickly. So this is just to secure, to make sure that your stitching does not go apart. So to completely finish off the zip, we have inserted the zip now. So what we need to do is do a top stitch, which is basically on the surface side. We were sewing on the inside, now we're sewing on the surface side. What's going to be seen by people when you're wearing it. So we do a top stitch. Back stitch and do the same on the other side as well. Back stitch. And then after that has been done, what you do is you need to take your seam ripper, which is basically, it unpicks stitches that you have done before. You know, the first stitch that I did, which is now basically in the center right here, that we need to unpick for it to expose the zip, for you to be able to open and close the zip. So just basically unpick like this, and you start to see the zip already emerging. So which is obviously, you can see, you can open and close the zip now. So you unpick it all the way to basically where this middle part is. That's where the zip basically will stop. And then after you've unpicked, obviously you need to take off the excess fabric, excess little threads there. And also what's important with everything you sew, always make sure you actually iron it. You must iron it flat, press it nicely. The wonderful thing about pressing something is that especially for those of you that are new sewers or that are new to the sewing game, it makes you hide the little mistakes, so to speak. If you can't sew in a straight line when you're pressing it, if you press it on top properly, like this, it will help you sort of hide the little, mistakes that you may have made. So it's important to always press, always press. So yeah, that's our zip inserted. So you can open and close it, you see. If I pressed it now, we would have lain properly flat on top of each other. This is a basic zip that you can, the most basic zip that you can actually get is this. Okay, so now I want to talk about fittings. Fitting is something that's important before you complete your garment, you must do a fitting, sort of basically like a in between your completion and your starting of your garment. So this is sometimes with certain fabrics, the way they stretch and have a give is different. So after you've cut the pattern and insert it together, it may be a little bit big. So for instance, this dress, can you turn for me slightly? It's a little big for Frida. So what the fitting does basically, it will help you, guide you to know what to take in, so you can have the right size for the model or the person that you're creating this item for. In this case, basically, like all of this has to go. So basically you take this and then you pin it. You do it all the way down. So it hugs the body in all the right ways. So it looks like the dress or the garment is actually made for the person that it's intended for. So you see, you can already see the difference. It's a lot more tighter. So the fittings are very important for just that one reason. Because sometimes you may have taken the seam allowance a little too big. So just to make it a little bit more adjusted to the body of the person that you're making it for, do a fitting before you complete. Sometimes it's even better to do it before you insert the zip, because sometimes once you have inserted the zip, it's a little bit more difficult, especially if the fabric is a little bit more delicate. It's difficult to unpick and redo the whole process again. So before you even insert the zip, do a fitting or try it on and do a fitting. I believe you're probably going to be doing it on yourself, so have somebody help you.
We can't wait to see your final designs.
Have fun.
Be creative.
And good luck!